Let's think about actually drawing some objects that exist in the world in 3 dimensions. That is to say, drawing objects that exist out there that we might want to represent. Like, how do we go about kind of learning about those and drawing those in 3 dimensions? So I'm going to take the example of trees because I think it's a nice counterpoint because it's sort of organic, but there's a certain logic to how trees are kind of put together, which lets you kind of plan them and play around with them. And it's a good exercise to kind of study something, because part of understanding the form and learning how to draw it is actually understanding the fundamental structural sort of groundwork of what's going on there with that object. This could be the same for cars. If you want to draw cars, you need to understand a lot of the details that we might see out there. You also need to understand a lot of the structural concepts that underlie kind of how an automobile works, how it's put together, how mechanics work, how engineering works, how physics work. The more you can understand that, the easier it is, surprisingly, to sort of draw the exterior of a car. And certainly the easier it is to come up with your own. And that's really what we're going to sort of play around with here, is trying to draw trees and create studies from trees, but not two-dimensional studies, three-dimensional studies, where we're trying to explore that form based on reference. And again, this sort of thing is really important because you understand how tree branches kind of intersect. There's a certain logic to it depending on different trees. And this is the same for cars. If you look at sort of how the evolution of like the automobile has happened over time, you'll see that a lot of the things which we might see as visuals are actually mostly sort of functional. So if you take sort of, just for example, like an older sort of Formula version of like a Formula One car, it kind of doesn't have all the fins and aerodynamics on it, because part of the reason that those cars go fast is that they've got aero on them, which is things actually creating downforce. So, often you have like someone wanting to make their car look really fast, so they put a big spoiler on the back. It seems fast because Formula One cars have spoilers on the back, and the reason they do is because once you get up to speed, those actual structural components are helping the air kind of actually push down on the car, so that a really light car that might weigh, like 800 kilos or something, in reality, actually once it's going sort of 100, 200 miles an hour, it actually has effective downforce of multiple tons. And that's what aerodynamics are doing on cars. And frequently, even sort of fancy, fast cars, like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, a McLaren car, the high-end kind of supercars, hypercars, a lot of the things which look just like fins and shapes and all this kind of stuff going on, it's actually often frequently designed to make the car go faster. And it's a strange thing, but we can actually often easily dissect as viewers things which sort of seem superfluous, and frequently things which seem like they're designed for a purpose have a lot more sort of meaning to them and gravity, which is important. So the more you can understand kind of how cars are made, the more you can understand how trees are made, the easier it is for you to kind of draw ones that exist, because you're not forgetting any details. That certain details need to be there, and the easier it is for you to make up your own and sort of extrapolate. You can sort of imagine that there may be certain fins on a car to do certain things, and you don't need to know completely detailed sort of explanations, but you can at least make it up. For instance, often there's lots of little like curves on the side of cars. Often those are actually to channel air through to the brakes, to cool the brakes, blah, 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 etc., etc. Now, trees are the same. So, again, I like making a counterpoint of something which is highly technical and something which is highly sort of organic. Frequently, these things are actually based on sort of, a similar sort of logic, and it's just about sort of finding that logic and sort of understanding it yourself. So if we look at sort of trees are often, like sort of plants, are based on sort of a simple algorithm where you've got a single kind of trunk or feeler comes up. If we look at some of these smaller plants down here, I don't know whether you can see that with compression, but we've got like a single sort of stalk and then a leaf comes out of that. Tree is very similar, just that once we get to things being this big, we've kind of got a single trunk that often, depending on the tree, can turn into multiple kind of significant trunks, and then branches kind of come off there, based on kind of very simple algorithms that the tree is kind of programmed with, that an organism is programmed with. And each tree is kind of different. It's got its own logic for how it sort of works. And that sort of depends on its environment. So, you can see these kind of more like savanna sort of trees are designed to stop things eating the branches. They've got to kind of get off the ground, stop getting eaten by things. That's one of the reasons why they might kind of look like that. Some of these trees, like in a kind of forest, they're often going straight up because they kind of need to clear the canopy. So we need to have a very straight trunk that just goes straight up as far as it can possibly go. And you can see even this one, which is small, is still single sort of trunk going straight up. It's got to go up till it reaches the canopy, at which point it can actually create leaves to photosynthesize, etc., etc. And often the structure of a tree is something that's made up of that simple logic, where a tree has to get as many leaves as it can, access to sun, so it can photosynthesize. And it also has to have a root system so that it can supply water, so that sort of happens. It's possible. So that's kind of why these things happen. And basically, you get these big branches occurring because the further they can reach away from each other, or the further that they can kind of reach to a situation where they can get more sun, the more leaves you can have, which means the more sort of energy the tree can create. And often the root system and the branches just kind of need to be thick enough so that it can actually support that kind of length and that kind of sort of weight, because the tree actually weighs quite a bit. And as a sort of general sort of rule, a tree will have a root system that is somewhat almost like a mirror image of the branch system. It's just underground. So if you think about every sort of tree, normally, again, depends on the tree, but we'll have a root system that's kind of going underground and spreading out to kind of support the tree. So there's a lot of engineering going on. There's a lot of very simple logic, very simple algorithms going on, but you still have out of that these massively complex sort of branches and systems and that kind of thing that's going on. And what's happening there is that we have a simple algorithm, which is like grow up. But, in these kind of high forest situations, the tree is kind of growing up. So it doesn't matter. Any tree that kind of messes around or plays around too much is just going to be dead because it's not getting enough sun. If it's a different type of tree that's not in a sort of forest, it can maybe get more by growing out. And so it's going to grow out. And as it grows out, you have gravity, which is sort of playing on this. Or you might have other trees which are blocking light from a certain vantage point, which means that the tree will actually grow around that. So it's more likely to receive light from a certain situation. So simple algorithms, simple rules, simple engineering, plus kind of the environment often creates very complex shapes. And again, all of these trees are different, and the shape language for them is a little bit different. So what we want to do in order to kind of understand this is kind of, say, well, what kind of tree would it be? Where would it be? And what are the shapes that go into making that tree? So let's do a few studies and just see if we can kind of get our head around how this sort of form is constructed and how we might go about learning it. So one way that is frequently sort of taught or talked about is to sort of do a study where we basically sort of copy what's there, what you see. And this is kind of useful for some things, but really, if you're interested in drawing out of your own imagination, which frequently if you need to draw sort of concept art or something like that, comics, illustration, maybe illustration, you've got time to go and look at photo reference and get exactly the right thing. But in general, it's really valuable to be able to kind of break these down. And as you break them down, you'll learn about them. So let's just break a few down and kind of see if we can learn. Let's start with a really kind of simple one, like a weird one, and say sort of, you know, if we have a tree, like how can we break it down? And the simplest way is to kind of think about it just being sort of a simple cylinder, right, with a big sort of canopy. And I'm just drawing it from sort of side view so we can kind of get an idea sort of what's going on. So think about there being sort of some sort of mesh on it, which helps us describe and see the form. So this might be kind of, you know, like a really, really simple tree. Just get rid of this one. Then we can do this. So yeah, we've got like a simple tree like this, and all it is a trunk goes straight up, so it can kind of clear other things, and then it has a bunch of sort of branches that are going out, but you know, frequently you don't need to draw them if we're drawing it from sort of far away, because we just kind of see maybe all of the leaves that are created by that. And so we kind of just have a kind of mass of leaves on top. But again, it's important to kind of do this, and let's sort of have a go at actually sort of drawing and understanding this kind of tree. So it's got sort of tapering form, almost like a bottle, and it seems to taper down to the bottom, but sort of less than at the top. And I don't know what's going on up there. Although if we look down here, we can sort of see what happens. It seems like it sort of goes up like this. So the structure of the tree is a bit like that. And then it's kind of going out from up there and creating sort of other branches. And, you know, when it's sort of got plenty of branches, they're going to all be covered in foliage. Now, again, it seems like often, and when we kind of get these sort of assignments, I'm drawing these little trees and I'm drawing them sort of almost iconically. The reason that we break them up like this, and the reason that it's good to think about things not as the complexity that's going on there, but as the simplest shape possible to describe that form, is that this allows me to kind of rotate it in space a lot easier. So again, if I'm thinking about this as kind of, you know, a kind of cube or something, or a cylinder, I can kind of, again, construct based on all of these principles of perspective and sort of almost, you know, geometric perspective, but certainly sort of form drawing based perspective. And I can start to think about where some of these different branches might go, and I can start to kind of construct them. And then if, again, I want to kind of, if we think about there being sort of maybe some sort of different sort of lines going around, and like where there might be sort of foliage, I can sort of start to put these in perspective and get a feel for how these forms might, you know, little blunt bunches of leaves and foliage. You can sort of get an idea for where they might be. And the more I can kind of construct this and think about this as three-dimensional, and obviously, you know, if we kind of think about this as being ground, as it sort of goes down into the ground, we're going to get roots, which again we don't need to draw, but it's important to think about them because some plants and trees have their roots exposed, and frequently those are some of the more interesting trees to draw because they are things we can sort of readily sort of interact with. So again, thinking about this is kind of the base and radiating out from that. So you can see when I kind of just drew them by sort of estimating it, it's a lot harder. Whereas if we think about sort of, this is roughly how far those things might come, we can actually sort of start to draw them in three-dimensional space. Because if we have a tree trunk like this, right? Again, this different type of tree trunk. This is more the generic sort of tree trunk. And we think about, okay, like sort of around sort of here, this is where the ground is. Okay. Now let's think about what will be happening sort of underneath the ground. Underneath the ground, this is sort of going to continue. But actually it doesn't continue that far down. Very soon after it gets into the ground, it's going to start to branch out. And frequently it'll kind of branch out on the ground. So let's think about sort of how, again, if it is sort of a bit cylindrical in the way it sort of breaks out, think about the space that is likely to take up underground. And if it kind of keeps spreading out underground, what kind of space is that likely to take up? And if we draw it in perspective, again, not super accurately, but just enough to get the feeling that, right, if I'm going to put out sort of, if we look at this in the top view, what's happening, we've kind of got, this is the trunk, and out of the trunk, we're going to have a kind of even spacing of roots, like major roots that are going into the ground. And obviously that's kind of sitting on some sort of ground plane. And underneath that, the roots are going to kind of go out sort of further. But this is underground. So again, you don't need to draw it underground. But this, again, it's important to sort of visualize what's happening. So what will happen is we'll get sort of maybe some roots coming here. We'll get some coming here. Some, maybe one there. And one out. Maybe one just behind there. So just doing that has given me a much better sort of feeling for where these are going to be pointing and sort of how to measure these different roots that are coming out of a tree. Then I can kind of, curve some of this roots up because that's frequently what happens. Again, it's all about sort of engineering structure, making sure that the tree doesn't sort of fall over. And then, if you've ever seen a tree kind of uprooted, you know that there's a lot of sort of stuff going out here. So thinking about these structural aspects helps me do simple things like this, like place roots that are kind of expanding out and place them in perspective. So you can see these ones that we see side on are the longest from this point to this point. The ones that are kind of foreshortened as we go are sort of, like short, and these ones foreshortened back, kind of short. And often when we consider foreshortening, we often think about it as being some kind of magical, again, you've got that concept of like, superhero sort of foreshortening, like, oh, there's a guy and he's like punching into the frame. And, he's got this huge hand, probably even bigger than this. We've got foreshortening, and it's kind of all a bit mysterious. Often foreshortening, even with organic objects like this, and this is a very sort of inorganic, like fairly geometric organic object, but you'll see very quickly like how we can actually extrapolate this quite quickly, is often a foreshortening is just doing the logical, obvious thing. We're just measuring into the distance and kind of basing it, it's very similar to this length, which is not being foreshortened. But because we can just form draw and we can apply this simple perspective, you just draw it there. That's where it is. And you've done foreshortening. That's it. Often foreshortening is just making the obvious perspective choice. So you've got these sort of constructs of trees, which again, this is more the engineering of trees. These are things I know about trees that are not in photos. I know it because I've seen different photos of trees and I've sort of thought about it. And really, you know, most of you are just going to be like, yeah, I get it. But, you know, let's look at some of these more interesting trees where we've got, you know, maybe it's like sort of germinated on a rock and then it's just kind of grown up and it's like, yeah, no problem. We just sort of go around a rock. What happens? How does this work? So you might think, oh, well, you know, you need some reference for that, right? Let's think about, okay, we've got a rock. Rock is kind of, again, going underneath the ground. I can draw through, drawing the ground plane. Again, necessary, unnecessary, maybe, I don't know. Certainly going to help me make this side line up with this side to make sure they're similar. Means that I can trace this edge, which, you know, is kind of like this edge. It's going to be a lot easier. Again, this is not a sort of round egg rock, but anyway, now let's think about sort of structurally what's happening. So structurally, the tree is kind of sitting here. We've got a tree trunk going down here, and then we've kind of got some different forms kind of going here until they meet the ground. So we've got other cylinders coming down here, and we've got another cylinder kind of, and it seems like there's another sort of mass. There's like a sort of that almost the tree is like, it's a cylinder, and then there's kind of another sort of cylinder underneath that. And again, this is where often the sort of tree kind of branches out, and then it's kind of branching out from there. So might erase that a bit and just clarify this aspect of the form, is that we have a kind of a big sort of bulb there, and out of that comes all these other forms. So let's just sort of think about how this happens. And again, we're terminating on the ground plane. And this one is coming over a bit and going like this. And this one is a bit weird. It looks like that this thing is actually connected here. So again, I've got quite a big sort of pencil, but let's have a look at this. Let's see what's kind of going on. Again, studying the form, almost at like thumbnail sort of iconic level, but still I've got a feeling for how these forms are going to interact. And we've kind of got this thing, and this kind of is almost like we've got a cylinder coming this way, got a cylinder coming this way, and they're kind of intersecting. So again, you could just kind of draw the light and draw the shadow and try and sort of copy this, but certainly once you get good at rendering simple cylinders and geometric objects, this kind of stuff will make a lot more sense. So this sort of seems like it's sort of going over here, maybe terminating on this side of the rock, and we've got another one kind of going over here, terminating on this side of the rock. Why do we need to draw through all the way over there? Well, maybe, you know, it lets us know what's going to happen here. And when I sort of draw this out, maybe if he's got a sort of a little thing going out here, it's just going to give me information. I don't have to think about what's happening over there. So once we reach the ground plane, again, I'm making this as simple as possible. I could get a lot more mileage probably out of making this a larger drawing, but let's sort of see what's happening. What happens to these forms once they get down here? Typically, they seem to kind of go in a crisscross sort of pattern. They go for a little bit, then they change direction, go for a little bit, change direction. There's not many that kind of are straight. I don't know why that is. But this one seems like it's kind of coming to us a bit, and then it's kind of going down, and it's kind of going up a bit, like this. If we look at it from the side, and over here, it's kind of got another one, and then it's kind of going into the ground plane there. So again, this is not a drawing per se. The point is to understand the form. So some of these might get a little bit lost. You can see this one kind of comes almost here. And one of the things you can also notice about the form is it seems like sometimes it kind of spreads out a bit. We've got one kind of here, which looks like it's coming down or something. So this one is kind of coming into the picture. And we've got a thing here, it kind of meets the ground plane and splits into 3 and kind of terminates. So again, I'm drawing kind of simply, not because I'm not trying to draw a fancy picture. What I'm trying to do is sort of understand the structure of this. Now, something really important is, if this was some sort of, fantasy scene or something, I have a guy here, maybe he's got like a sword and a shield, some kind of fancy helmet or something. Just doing this in a thumbnail, you can see that if I learn how to kind of break down the forms at this level, this is going to help me a lot. I've got really good information here with which I can sort of build a secondary drawing. And it seems like, some of these this one goes along here, kind of goes here. You can see it kind of twists and kind of comes towards. Sometimes there's, again, some leaves and stuff over it. You can see that what's happening. So again, this is a good way, because frequently what might happen is like you might get this sort of root is going to sort of terminate into the ground plane, but it might kind of go under the ground and then sort of, like come up again over here. And you frequently see this kind of pattern. And if I can trace it and sort of get some of that perspective working, that might help me a lot. Just have a little bit of the tree kind of popping up here. Again, those small little details help me sort of plan this. So again, if we think about sort of, okay, like we've got leaves here. Sorry, we've got roots kind of going over here. Let's think about just, if I try and draw an imaginary sort of circle on the ground plane, start to sort of visualize again what the ground plane might look like. What I can do is then start to judge, okay, well, we might get some other roots kind of coming over here, like around the same sort of area. But, I'm not going to draw roots like all over here, because this is kind of probably the equivalent to over here on the ground plane. So understanding where your ground plane is, what's happening there, and sort of how these things are foreshortening is really important. I can make up a lot more details now than I could. So again, this is sort of just thinking about that initial form, what's happening there. And all I'm doing is drawing like spaghetti cylinders, basically. If you can draw sort of just 2 lines and then decide which way they're going, then you can kind of do this. It's just a matter of paying attention, understanding kind of how this stuff is likely to work. So again, think about horizon. Where's horizon line likely to be? So it might be kind of, we're sort of looking up at this point, looking up at these as they go up. And again, I can't really see what's happening up there, but it looks like this whole iconography here of the tree kind of turns a bit more into sort of like these straight up and down sort of cylinders here. And, 1 or 2 little branches and things coming off. Leaves. So again, it's about sort of iconography. What happens to these things? The more that we can study this, the easier it will be for me to again have a go at drawing something like this without the reference. And this is how I personally recommend you use reference. If in terms of how you collect it and how you use it. If I was going to draw a scene where I wanted something like this, I would get a bunch of reference. I would do a few little studies to figure out how that sort of thing works. Or these days, I could probably just sort of look at it and go, let me make up my own on the fly because I've done a lot of this. But understanding how a lot of these structures work is really important. So this is how this task works, is that we just study little parts of it and just understand that the more that you can understand how these forms are kind of interacting, the more that they go into your brain and that there's some sort of logic applied. So, here we've got a very sort of different sort of logic of how the tree is kind of working. And the shapes are different. So, in this one, it might sort of say, okay, we've got a branch kind of here. Let's draw this one a little bit bigger, just so you can we can sort of go up that one extra level of detail. Let's sort of draw this and sort of see what's happening there. Again, quite hard to understand, but the more you kind of draw of different bits of the tree, the easier this is to understand. So it's hard to see whether these are kind of really round or not. But you can see this one looks like it's kind of, maybe it's kind of going into the distance a bit. So there. And then we kind of got this mass. So again, this one is quite hard to figure out what's going on, because I'm sort of seeing this is in shadow. So this is where you can see that the trouble with interpreting references is that if I just copy this, I might be able to get it sort of looking close, but what I'm trying to do is trying to understand the form. So I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm using a few kind of little marks that are going to help me, but the main thing here that I'm trying to understand is kind of where's that form going. So this one I think is kind of coming at us a bit more. And you can see it's kind of, I've got a little sort of cylinder here, and there's little chunks of it kind of coming off, where probably what's happened, if you look at a lot of trees, what's happening is that a branch used to be here, because it's an intersection, and that might be what's happening here. Branch used to be here, but it kind of broke off, because this is a dead tree. No leaves. But again, studying, so instead of just drawing this as a curvy thing, you could just kind of sort of draw this as a curvy thing. And because I've been doing this for a long time, it's a lot easier for me to kind of suggest these things with line. So I'm using a line that kind of, I'm sort of showing that these forms might be sort of traveling in different directions, because I'm using these lines to overlap. But the best way to understand this form is to, again, it's kind of almost coming at us there, and then it's kind of dipping back, is to kind of try and think about where the form is coming. And if it's getting too kind of curvy and ambiguous, just kind of go back to simple straight lines. Straight lines are the easiest way to break down a form. You can always make them sort of curvier later on. So one of the rules here is that the branches always get sort of a lot thinner as they sort of, reach the extremity, which is, fairly common, but not. And we see here we've got a little kind of cylinder coming at us here. And all these trees are gonna sort of work in different ways. So you can see we've got one of those little, again, cylinder kind of there. And you may interpret these forms different to me. That's fine. As long as it kind of, at the end of the day, we kind of are getting this feel of this kind of tree and what's happening here. So again, this sort of cylinder. Let's break it down even more. Then we got this one kind of coming here. Seems like it kind of curves a bit more that way. So again, the more you draw through, the better. I'm not doing a whole lot of it, but I'm just trying to suggest sort of where the form is going. Then we kind of go up, then we go this way, then we go up. So again, pay attention to the shape language, what's going on here. So again, it's just repeating these same concepts. And it's going to be a lot easier to think about the details of this form once you've got this structure down. But anyway, this is kind of roughly what's happening. So again, I'm kind of drawing the contour, but I'm combining it with where I think and this looks like it's kind of coming at us this way, and then sort of going like that and like that. Again, bad tangents there. So just trying to find the structure in there. So again, this is a very different top of a tree to what's going on here, where it's just like, where I think what's going to happen, if we bring this down, I can have another go at it. Where I think what's going to happen is that these are just going to kind of go up, more or less, and they kind of branch up. And this is because they're, as I was saying, they're in a forest where there's a canopy, which means light doesn't get down here to the bottom. There's no point branching out this way. You have to go up, and you may have like a little sort of window at the top of the canopy where you can put all your leaves. And if you block other plants down the bottom of the ground, then you kind of starve them of light, which means that they're not going to try and occupy the root system and steal the water. So again, it's a lot of David Attenborough documentaries sort of help you understand this sort of thing. But yeah, this is kind of what's happening at the top here, whereas this is a completely different sort of structure. They're all trees. And again, this sort of more angular way that these branches are going is a bit different to this really sort of floppy sort of style that these roots have, which is, again, different shape language. And, you know, if we look at sort of look at one of these, like, you know, a typical Australian gum tree, it's similar, but a lot of the branches are kind of very round, you know, so often the way that they intersect is a bit different. You know, if you look at this kind of intersection here, there's a lot more kind of twisting and sort of, you know, much more like weird sort of organic form. This is kind of coming up here. And this one is kind of, looks like it's sort of coming up here. And these are kind of quite good to study because they're almost, it's almost like someone designed them to kind of show how this sort of thing works. And you can see that the way that they branch out, it's almost like this branch is just kind of keeps going, and then you know, this one just kind of comes out, and it comes out again. Same way these branches sort of meet the ground, almost meet the other tree, and then we kind of sort of branch out a little bit. And these ones are kind of, you see that, you know, there's not many straight things. We get like a little way, and then we kind of bend, you know, like a little way, and then it's going to kind of change direction a bit in the way it's sort of going a little bit, change direction. So again, study these things, think about it. These ones go straight up. These ones always changing direction. Different strategy for life and how that should all work. So you can see straight away, like this is a slightly different shape language. It's creating sort of slightly different. These ones seem to kind of do a bit more kind of going back on themselves. There's a bit more of this sort of angularness. It's a bit more organized. All the branches are kind of going sort of out. Again, very similar, but slightly different. Slightly different sort of size. Also, you know, one of the things with a gum tree is, I mean, they're quite big. And this is, you know, that kind of eucalypt styles. We've got this big kind of, let's zoom up a bit and go here. Again, thinking about this. Kind of got a big trunk, and then we've got a big sort of bifurcation of that trunk. And, you know, that's kind of how they'll go. They'll go, you know, this ground plane, not heaps of roots going in that you can see. There'll be a massive root system underneath there, but that's kind of the shape language. That's what's going on. Compare it to like one of these, and it's slightly different kind of shape language. What's going on? This is kind of going up. It's much more kind of straight, and this isn't just round. You know, we've kind of already got, we're kind of breaking up into almost like sort of separate bits of the trunk anyway, and then it's kind of breaking out. This one is kind of coming out at right angles a lot more, and then it's kind of sweeping up, and you've got these kind of long sweeping sort of branches that kind of just sort of go up. And these ones are not always changing direction. Different plant, different strategy, trying to do different things. This one looks, obviously it's been sort of pruned a lot. Might look a lot different if it wasn't pruned, but who knows. So again, got lots of different sort of branches coming up, and they just taper in their size. So again, it's hard to kind of understand what's happening with the form when we just sort of draw it in outline. The more we do this, we can kind of approximate what might happen when we render it, how that is going to kind of work. Again, I'm not really sort of drawing this one, I'm just sort of thinking about how it might be constructed. So when they kind of join each other, think carefully about this form as well. You know, let's sort of break this down. The more you can, again, understand this, the better. Let's have a go at it somewhere else. So this one's kind of got, this kind of form is going this way. And again, we've kind of got this sort of curviness happening with the contour. And as we kind of get here, we kind of, some of these are sort of becoming onto their own. And we've got this kind of stuff happening. So trace these contours, start to think about like where are these branches sort of coming from? Where are they? And it seems like this one is kind of, it's almost like it's kind of using this bit here to support itself. And it's not quite as smooth as like the gum, sort of when you've got these things happening here. You're getting a lot more kind of weird angles. And again, this one is kind of getting these kind of things where you got like a little shelf you could go up there and sort of sit on it. And it's either got like new sort of sprouts coming out of there, or they might be sort of separate trees. Don't know. So we've got this kind of like a weird thing going here. So let's kind of sort of maybe think about maybe the contour of this is a bit sort of different. No, it's not quite it. This is still quite sort of solid, but got some sort of form happening here. And as it's kind of growing, this kind of standard the standard logic of it is kind of deviating a bit, and it's growing and it's kind of getting old, and there's a few sort of weird things kind of happening. But here we've kind of got, it seems like there's a separate sort of form here, kind of there almost, and this is kind of curving down. And sort of around here we've almost got like a little kind of space created. Again, I don't want to abstract that too much, but just think about kind of this is like the slightly different forms. And when you come to paint it, it's really important to kind of understand this. It seems like, you know, there's some kind of stuff happening there. So again, study these things in as much detail as necessary and break it down and try and understand each separate aspect of like new trees, new things. You can see kind of this is what's happening with the new ones. I mean, it might not be, there might be some kind of other thing growing, but yeah, there's no sort of amount of detail which is not going to be useful to study. So yeah, again, you look at sort of this type of tree, it's got a lot of completely different sort of structure and different sort of way it's put together. But a lot of this reference also is really good for thinking about perspective and how organic forms kind of come forward and backwards. Again, this is a totally different type of tree. Going to be very different to kind of draw. We're going to think about, got these big sort of roots and trunks that I think are supposed to, maybe they store water, something like that. And you can see like they kind of come off in a weird way. It's almost like all the space here is kind of just being broken up into separate things, and sometimes they seem to be kind of flopping over, and then they kind of go up, kind of here, like this. Sometimes they're kind of twisting. And that's the basic logic. And you can see what happens is that then we kind of, once we get into branches, you've got, these quite sort of strong systems. So we kind of get up like this, and then we're kind of getting thinner and thinner. And then it's just kind of, these are branching off. So again, I think it's important to kind of understand how these forms work, but often just understand sort of what's happening, like what's the logic of it, what's the iconography. Do they go like this, or these ones sort of seem like it kind of breaks off, and again, there's like a bit of a curve, and some of these are coming off at right angles. So understand that shape language, understand that iconography of these different types of trees, and kind of how they work. And this will give you the insight it takes to make up your own trees. And also these things are great exercises just for learning how to break up sort of just everyday forms. It's always about being as observant as possible. You can see what happens is, it kind of gets very close to the ground plane. And then, we get like this kind of flurry of little kind of roots and things. So I think one of the concepts here is big things which are hard to climb, like it's a lot harder for things to climb up there and take all the eat all the leaves and things like that. I mean, I'm sure things could, but you can see like that's a person is kind of standing here. So, little creatures, it's going to be a lot harder for them to kind of climb up there and reach that height. So there's often, quite logical rationales for why these things happened. And you can see, you often get this sort of, shape language happening where you got kind of a trunk of a tree. It's kind of bifurcating like this. And then it's you got this kind of curve, and then this one's straight. So like curve, straight, up. And then this just kind of goes up. So yeah, very interesting shape language, totally different from the others. And again, it's really important to sort of break these things down if you're going to start to have different branches kind of cross over each other. It's important to kind of know where they are. That'll help you kind of put some of them back in the distance with atmosphere, or think about where they're going to be receiving light. All of these things are important. Kind of goes that. So yeah, the more you learn the shape language, again, we're just drawing drawing shapes really, but making sure they're in perspective and that we're understanding the form and studying how these shapes are created. because we step back and we kind of see, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a tree. When you like take away the image and go like, okay, now draw it again and make up your own. It's only through understanding this kind of shape language. Oh, it kind of goes like this, and then it goes like this. Or this one goes like up, and then like this. Or the, gum tree is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Different shapes. This one is a bit more like this. Different shape language, different forms, different ways that all these small things that all trees have are going to look. Some of these roots are going to look, like this. When you can see, some of these roots join together. All of these things are interesting. You get this weird kind of bobbly, weird look where, this is kind of maybe what the tree would look like underground, but some of it's been eroded. So you get a chance to see what's happening. These things join together. They're roots, but they're kind of starting to become one sort of system. So pay attention to these things when you're walking around every day. Pay attention to these things when you're looking at reference, and remember them when you come to draw trees and things from your imagination. This is really the key to expanding your visual library, understanding the world, kind of how it works and how to represent it visually. And trees are a really good place to start because it's an excellent example that we can see and study where you've got simple rules that apply to everything, but small environmental situations and different scenarios are just modifying it slightly. And it's very easy to see how these small subtleties can mean everything.